I never thought a simple compliment would change the way I looked at love. For most of my life, I spent time chasing girls my age, thinking beauty and attraction were only about how someone looked on the outside. But the truth started to hit me on an ordinary afternoon, inside the home I knew so well. My best friend's mom had always been around, someone I respected, someone who carried herself with a grace I rarely noticed before. She wasn't loud. She wasn't trying to impress anyone, yet there was something about her presence that made a room calmer the moment she walked in. I had been over at their house countless times. To me, it was almost like a second home. I knew the smell of her cooking, the sound of her voice calling my friend from upstairs, the way she welcomed me as though I were part of the family. Still, that day felt different. She came into the living room with her usual smile, holding a cup of tea, and for the first time, I really paid attention. She looked beautiful, not in a flashy way, but in a way that felt real. The way her hair framed her face, the way her kindness seemed to soften her features, the way she carried herself with dignity. Without thinking too much, the words slipped from my mouth. I said, "You actually look better than most girls my age." The moment I heard myself, I froze. It wasn't something I had planned to say, and I knew it could sound strange coming from me. My heart raced, worried she might take it the wrong way. But instead of frowning, she looked at me with surprise and then let out a small laugh. "Then maybe you should stay with people like me instead of wasting time on those young girls," she replied, her tone playful yet steady. Her response caught me off guard. It wasn't a rejection, and it wasn't a dismissal either. It was a tease, but behind it, I felt something more, something that lingered in the air between us for longer than it should have. I laughed nervously, trying to brush it off, but the thought stayed with me. That night, I couldn't stop replaying the moment in my head. What did she mean by that? Was it just a light-hearted joke, or was she trying to tell me something? I thought about the way she looked at me, the way her eyes sparkled for just a second when she answered. It wasn't the same way she looked at her son, or anyone else for that matter. There was a hint of recognition, as if she understood more than she let on. I started to realize that my compliment wasn't just words thrown into the air. It was the truth. Girls my age always seemed restless, chasing attention, living for social media, trying too hard to appear older than they were. But she was different. She didn't need to prove anything. Her beauty wasn't about makeup or filters. It was about maturity, about how she handled herself, about the calm she carried in her presence. That kind of beauty didn't fade with age. It only grew stronger. The more I thought about it, the more I questioned myself. Why did I feel such admiration for her? Was it just respect, or was it something deeper? I had never looked at her this way before, but now I couldn't ignore it. She seemed like a mirror showing me everything I wanted in a person: kindness, wisdom, stability, and a softness that felt rare in the noisy world I lived in. By the end of the week, her words were still echoing in my mind. "Then maybe you should stay." That sentence had become a quiet whisper I carried everywhere. It stirred something inside me, something I couldn't explain yet. I began to notice her more, not just as my best friend's mom, but as a woman who had a glow I couldn't find anywhere else. And while I didn't know where this realization would take me, I knew one thing for certain. That single conversation had changed the way I looked at her forever. After that day, it became harder to ignore the way I felt whenever I was around her. Every time I visited my best friend's house, I found myself unconsciously waiting for her to appear, just to catch her smile or hear her voice. What once felt like background comfort now felt like the highlight of being there. She had a way of speaking that made even the simplest conversations meaningful. It started with small things. She would ask about my studies, my future plans, or how I was handling pressure. At first, I thought she was just being caring, like any motherly figure. But the more we spoke, the more I noticed she listened differently than most people. She wasn't just nodding out of politeness. She genuinely paid attention, as though every word I said mattered. It felt refreshing because with people my age, conversations often drifted into shallow topics. With her, it was deeper, calmer, and I always left feeling lighter. One afternoon, when my friend wasn't home yet, I found myself sitting in the kitchen as she prepared tea. She asked me what I wanted to do after graduation, and I admitted I felt uncertain. Instead of giving generic advice, she spoke with a wisdom that struck me. You don't need to have everything figured out right now. What matters is that you choose something that gives you peace, not just something that looks successful. Her words stayed with me far longer than she probably realized. As I watched her pour tea into cups, I noticed the little things, how steady her hands were, how gracefully she moved, how she managed to bring comfort into simple routines. Something about it drew me in. It wasn't just admiration anymore. I felt a pull, one I couldn't explain to anyone, especially not to my best friend. Over the weeks, I found myself complimenting her in ways that came naturally. One day, I told her, "You make life feel so peaceful. No wonder you look younger than you are." She paused for a moment, gave me a playful look, and then laughed softly. "You really know how to use your words," she said, shaking her head. But I could tell she didn't mind. In fact, there was warmth in her response, almost as if she appreciated being noticed in that way. That brief exchange left me thinking the whole night. She wasn't used to being complimented for who she was beyond her role as a mother, and I could sense it mattered to her. And for me, it wasn't flattery, it was the truth. She carried an elegance that made the chaos of the world seem less overwhelming. Slowly, an unspoken rhythm developed between us. Our conversations grew longer, filled with laughter and genuine care. Sometimes, when she looked at me while talking, her eyes held mine for a second too long. It wasn't intentional, perhaps, but I felt it. That tiny hesitation in letting go of eye contact carried more meaning than words could. I didn't want to overthink it, but at the same time, I couldn't ignore what was happening inside me. I realized I had started waiting for those moments, those quiet connections that made me feel understood in a way no one else did. When I left their house, it wasn't my best friend's jokes or the games we played that I remembered most. It was her words, her smile, the way she seemed to see me differently from others. I began questioning whether I was imagining it all. Was I just reading too much into her kindness? Or was there really something hidden beneath her calm exterior? The uncertainty kept me restless, but the truth was clear. My admiration was turning into something deeper, something that couldn't be ignored. By now, her presence had become more than just familiar. It had become something I quietly longed for. And though neither of us said anything directly, I felt a silent bond forming between us, one that was growing stronger with every passing day. The more time passed, the harder it became to separate admiration from desire. What started as respect had quietly grown into something I could no longer push aside. I found myself lying awake at night, replaying her words, her laugh, the way her eyes softened whenever she spoke to me. It was a dangerous thought, but I couldn't deny that I was falling for her. At first, I tried to convince myself it was just a passing phase. Maybe it was the comfort she gave me, the stability I craved while people my age seemed lost in their own worlds. But the more I tried to ignore it, the stronger it became. I began noticing how her mood affected mine. If she seemed cheerful, I carried that happiness with me all day. If she looked tired or quiet, I couldn't stop worrying about her. It was more than attraction. It felt like a connection. One evening, when my friend had gone out and I was about to leave, she started a conversation that changed everything. She asked me if I believed people could feel lonely even when surrounded by others. Her voice carried a weight I hadn't heard before. I told her yes. Sometimes being around people who don't understand you can make you feel lonelier than being alone. She looked at me for a long moment, then admitted softly, "That's how I feel sometimes." I didn't push her to explain, but she went on. She told me how life hadn't always turned out the way she imagined, how routines sometimes felt heavy, and how people often forgot she had dreams of her own. She didn't speak bitterly. Her tone was calm, almost resigned, but I could feel the quiet pain behind her words. Listening to her, I realized how little anyone probably asked her how she felt. Everyone saw her as someone dependable, but few saw her as a woman with her own needs and emotions. That night, I didn't just see her as my friend's mom. I saw her as someone human, vulnerable, longing for the same understanding I had been searching for. And in that moment, something shifted between us. She wasn't just a figure I admired anymore. She became someone I wanted to protect, someone I wanted to make feel seen. She must have sensed the intensity of my silence because she added, "Maturity isn't about age, you know. It's about how someone treats you." That single sentence struck me deeper than anything. It felt almost as if she was speaking directly to what was happening between us, acknowledging it without naming it. I didn't know how to respond, so I simply promised her that she deserved more than being overlooked. She smiled faintly, and in that smile, I sensed a quiet gratitude. The air between us felt charged, filled with words neither of us dared to speak. From that point on, I couldn't pretend anymore. Every time I saw her, I felt the tension. I noticed how her eyes lingered on me when we talked, how she laughed at things no one else found funny, how sometimes her voice softened when addressing me. These small gestures carried weight, and I clung to them because they told me I wasn't imagining it. Inside me, though, a conflict was growing. Part of me wanted to confess everything, to tell her openly how much she meant to me. But another part of me hesitated, worried about what it would mean, about the lines that could be crossed, about how my best friend would see it if he ever knew. The emotions were real, but so were the risks. Yet no matter how much I tried to silence those thoughts, the truth was clear. She had already become the center of my world. I didn't know where this unspoken bond would lead us, but I knew it was impossible to return to how things had been before. I knew I couldn't keep carrying my feelings in silence forever. They had grown too heavy, too consuming to hide. I wanted her to know, even if nothing came out of it, because the truth inside me had started to change the way I lived. One evening, when the timing felt right and the house was quiet, I found the courage to speak. My voice shook at first, but the words came from my heart. I told her she had changed the way I saw love, that her kindness and wisdom made me realize beauty wasn't about youth, but about how someone makes you feel. I admitted that I admired her more deeply than I ever thought possible. She looked at me, stunned but not angry. For a moment, silence filled the air, and I feared I had crossed a line. But then she sighed softly, almost as though she had been waiting for this moment. She told me she had sensed it, the way I looked at her, the way my words carried more than casual admiration. She didn't deny it, nor did she scold me. Instead, she chose honesty. She said my presence had reminded her of things she had forgotten about herself, that she was still a woman worthy of being seen, still someone who could inspire genuine affection. Her words didn't sound like rejection, but they also weren't an invitation to rush into something reckless. She told me gently that life is complicated, that love isn't just about what we want, but about the choices we make to protect what matters. She reminded me that feelings, no matter how strong, must be handled with care, especially when they could affect others around us. Even though her words carried caution, I felt relief. For the first time, everything was in the open. She hadn't dismissed me, hadn't made me feel foolish for what I confessed. Instead, she acknowledged it with grace, meeting me in a place of understanding. I told her I didn't expect anything, that all I wanted was for her to know what she meant to me. And she smiled, a tender smile that carried gratitude. She said, "And you've reminded me that love isn't about numbers, it's about how hearts connect." In that moment, I realized love doesn't always need to be about claiming someone or demanding something in return. Sometimes, love is about the lessons it leaves behind, the way it changes you, the way it teaches you to value things differently. She had shown me that maturity, kindness, and emotional connection were worth far more than fleeting attractions. We didn't make promises we couldn't keep, and we didn't cross boundaries we would regret. What we shared was unspoken but powerful, a bond that didn't need labels to exist. From then on, I carried myself differently. I respected her more than ever, not only as someone I admired, but as someone who had given me a new perspective on life. Walking away that night, I didn't feel defeated. I felt changed. I understood that sometimes love doesn't come to give us possession, but to teach us how to feel in ways we never thought possible. She had reminded me that true beauty is in understanding, in presence, in the calm someone brings into your life. That was more valuable than any youthful excitement I had ever chased. Looking back, I realized that my story with her wasn't about a dramatic ending or a grand confession leading to romance. It was about discovering a truth I hadn't seen before, that love can exist in quiet ways, in respect, in admiration, in lessons that stay with you long after the moment has passed. I learned that sometimes, the most powerful connections aren't the ones shouted to the world, but the ones carried silently in the heart, shaping who you are and how you choose to love in the future.